Howdy, everyone. It's Bradley Stalder, and this is episode 15 of the Best Bell Fantasy Football Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. In episode 14, I identified regression candidates at the wide receiver position. So, those wide receivers that I thought would improve their upside, and those wide receivers that I thought would get worse. So, some of the players that I included in that list: Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, all candidates to regress to the mean and reduce their wide receiver one rate from 2021. And there are a few players that I anticipate increasing their wide receiver one rate due to this regression, and that is Stephon Diggs, Keenan Allen, Jamison Crowder, Allen Robinson, and Marvin Jones. If you want more details about that, check out the YouTube channel, Best Bell Fantasy, or you can listen on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and it's episode 14 of the Best Bell Fantasy Football Podcast. Today, what I'm going to do is review the first Best Ball Mania team that I completed on Underdog. So I'm going to share my screen and just go through what some of the players I thought on the board and just some other takes that I had about the draft. So just a reminder for those unfamiliar with Best Ball Mania, it's a $25 entry on Underdog Fantasy. And if you haven't downloaded the Underdog Fantasy app, make sure that you do, or you can draft on underdogfantasy.com. And you can use the promo code FFF for a 100% deposit match up to $100. That's right. It's a great deal. The Best Ball Mania 3 tournament is underway, and the grand prize for just winning the regular season, $1 million. It is a total $10 million prize pool among it's a huge tournament, so definitely take advantage of that. They're great. I'm hoping that they'll get back into Michigan soon. This was a slow draft, though, and it was a slow draft because I couldn't, do some live drafts during the wedding I attended in Chicago. So I had to step out of town, get logged in, and draft. So it took about a week for this first team to be drafted. I anticipate over this next week, I will be posting more drafts, boards like this, and it's talking about some of the thoughts and strategies and reasons why I chose particular players. So let's take a look here. This is once again a 18 round team. And this first team, I went with a 2-5-9-2 build, pretty typical. I went with Patrick Mahomes at quarterback. ADP is 39.6, at least when I drafted him. So that was fourth round, and I took him at 38. So within 2 spots of ADP, I didn't want to go too far off. But the reason why I drafted Patrick Mahomes was because I took Travis Kelce. He fell to me at 14. So I wanted to prioritize getting at least Patrick Mahomes to pair with Travis Kelce for their spike weeks. Patrick Mahomes, as we know, those spike weeks happen at the highest rates in the NFL. So I wanted to get in on, getting Travis Kelce early made Patrick Mahomes a priority ad for me at ADP. So the other quarterback was Tom Brady, and I didn't have much Tampa Bay at wide receiver. In fact, I have 0 Tampa Bay shares. I have 0 tight end shares. And it was because Tom Brady fell 12 spots after ADP, a full round after ADP. And I just couldn't pass up the value at that point at 86. So those were my 2 quarterbacks, and I was very comfortable taking Tom Brady on one of the best offenses in the NFL, fast-paced, and I don't think I need to go into much more detail about why Tom Brady is a good number 2 quarterback there. Joe Mixon at pick 11. I've been confidently drafting Joe Mixon at the back end of the first round in these drafts. In fact, I got, of the 15 slow drafts I started, I got a lot of picks at 10, 11, and 12. And that's where I'm very comfortable drafting Joe Mixon. The Bengals' offensive line has improved significantly. They signed La'el Collins, one of the best left tackles in the NFL, and they also upgraded both of their guard positions pretty significantly. So their offensive line is going to be looking pretty good. Joe Mixon did struggle, behind their offensive line in yards per carry, but with upgrading the run blocking for the Bengals, I anticipate Joe Mixon will be much more efficient around the goal line. And then J.K. Dobbins, right? If you notice, he's 11 spots after ADP. It picked 62 in the 6th round. I put on my podcast a few episodes ago that J.K. Dobbins was one of my fades in the 5th round, but to get him, at the start of the 6th round, I wasn't going to pass that up at such a discount. So that was an important pick for me, getting a running back 2 in the 6th round. It was a value for sure. Randry Stevenson, once again, 8 picks after. It was the right spot to get a 3rd running back. Same thing with Rachaad White. By the time that I got Rachaad White, though, I knew that Tom Brady was on my team, and I wanted, Rachaad White as the handcuff to Leonard Fournette. And that's what you want to do in these best ball tournaments. You do not want your own handcuff if you can help it, because it's a minus EV selection. Like your handcuff is probably not making your best ball lineups. And if they are, that means that your backup or your starter has done either terribly or is injured. And the reason why they're the starter is because they're better than your backup or better than your handcuff. So you're probably not going to be getting the same replicated amount of points due to from that handcuff. But it's much more plus EV to have someone else's handcuff, because you know what? They might be outscoring your number 2 running back without any loss of value. And if you see here, I got Rachaad White a couple picks after ADP. That's fine. Same thing with Khalil Herbert. I got Khalil Herbert. He's another player that I want to be drafting, in these spots as a handcuff. We saw what Khalil Herbert was able to do when David Montgomery was out last year, and he put up the same efficiency metrics as David Montgomery. So yes, Khalil Herbert should be a value to get him at 182. It's outrageous. Jalen Waddle was my wide receiver 1. I got him a spot and a half after ADP. I've been drafting a lot of Waddle. I was taking him in the late 2nd, early 3rd. Now his ADP post Tyreek Hill has come to the back end of the 3rd round. So I was happy to get Jalen Waddle there. Brandon Cooks was a slate reach, by three spots versus ADP. But I love getting Brandon Cooks in these drafts, and I'm happy getting him as, my wide receiver 2. His spike weeks align, and we've seen what stats he can put up with Davis Mills as his quarterback. For my 3rd wide receiver, I was very much avoiding DeAndre Hopkins at ADP. At 75, not going to happen. But at 83, I'll take a shot at DeAndre Hopkins at ADP 80, pick 83 versus ADP is 75. So, I was talking with my former partner, Billy Musio, about this, and he said, if I can get DeAndre Hopkins anytime after 80, that's a win. And so, I'm viewing 83 as a good spot for DeAndre Hopkins. Chris Olave was a value. He was 12 spots, 12 spots after ADP. Christian Watson was 9 spots after ADP. George Pickens, 3 spots after ADP. Alec Pierce, 18 spots after ADP. Justin Ross, just as a late stack with Patrick Mahomes. I've been drafting a lot of Justin Ross near the end of drafts. And Calvin Austin, I drafted a little ahead of ADP, but I think that given the week 7 the playoff matchups and the Pittsburgh wide receiver matchups, Calvin Austin is a very interesting late round wide receiver that you can just be stashing on your bench. His player profiler comp is Marquise Brown, and he's got 4.3 speed. He may be undersized, but all he needs to do is take one to the house for you, get a touchdown to 60 yards, boom, and you are all set at your wide receiver 3 or your flex spot in these types of drafts. And then my last tight end, David Njoku, I got right at ADP. Happy to get Njoku there. So not a ton of stacking. There is a little bit of correlation here, but let's look at the board. Let me pull up the board. Uh, doo, doo, doo. Yes. And we shall share the screen. And there's the draft board. So as you can tell, I had the 11th spot. I'm looking at the first round and nothing really, pops out to me that's crazy except I would take Joe Mixon even over Derrick Henry at this point. Stephon Diggs at the 110 is a little early, I think. It's probably ahead of ADP. And same thing with Alvin Kamara. I've seen Alvin Kamara fall to even the third round in some of these drafts. So to take him at the 112, you must be really into Alvin Kamara. And looking at who else drafted, see Patrick NFL. I think Curtis Patrick was in this draft. So Devontae Adams, Travis Kelce, nothing crazy pops out to me in the second round. Mark Andrews still going at the 2.8. That is a little high. I'm happy that Aaron Jones's ADP is finally getting back up. It affirms the values that I had been having of him earlier in the season. If you haven't checked out my article on Fantasy Pros, he's one of the players that I identified as a stackable piece with Aaron Rodgers and a piece you should be targeting in your best ball drafts at the end of the second round. So T. Higgins goes off. I'm looking in the third round. I'm surprised that Leonard Fournette has not been starting to sneak into the second round. That's interesting to me. The first quarterback off the board, Josh Allen at the 310. It did stack with Stephon Diggs. That was actually a pretty good value. I've seen Josh Allen taken at the beginning of the third round or even late second round in some of these drafts. So good on this group to be a little more disciplined. Okay, let's take a look at the fourth round. I'm still surprised that Breece Hall has not been bumped up to, heck, even ahead of Antonio Gibson, Ezekiel Elliott, Cam Akers. Travis Etienne needs to be ahead of David Montgomery and the likes of Antonio Gibson and Ezekiel Elliott. I identified that Zeke is he's a value in round 5, but in mid to early round 4, that's not where you want to be taking Ezekiel Elliott. Okay. And then the 5.8. Oh, heck no. You do not want to be taking Juju Smith-Schuster at the 5.8, nor Chris Godwin at the 5.7. Yeah, this is disastrous. Some of these plays. I know that some of these teams are wide receiver thirsty, but come on, it's Gabe Davis at the 5.4, right behind a DK Metcalf and Cortland Sutton. Are you kidding me? That's why Brandon Cooks at 5.11 is going to be one of the best values in this draft, getting him at the 5.11. The upside that Brandon Cooks gives you is so much greater than the upside that the likes of a Juju Smith-Schuster gives you. Now, let's take a look at the next round. I'm liking that A.J. Dillon has been bumped up. Miles Sanders has started to creep into the 6th round. I was getting Miles Sanders round 8, round 9, even round 10, I think, in some of the drafts that I was doing in February. So Miles Sanders being bumped up to round 6, even back end, is interesting to me. Sky Moore at the 7.6. That's not stackable. In fact, let me take a look at that's why I couldn't get him. Okay. I toyed around with taking Tyler Lockett instead of DeAndre Hopkins at this spot, but my thoughts on Tyler Lockett versus DeAndre Hopkins, I'm getting a lot of exposure to Tyler Lockett, too much exposure. An unhealthy amount of exposure. Tyler Lockett has been going off wide receiver boards at wide receiver 38 to wide receiver 42. I've seen him anywhere in that range, and that's egregious. but I've been smashing him so much. I don't want 100% exposure though. And with DeAndre Hopkins falling significantly below ADP, I wanted at least, a couple shares of Hopkins. I've also in that realm been considering Adam Thielen. That's an interesting pick, I think. But yeah, Adam Thielen should be picked ahead of Christian Kirk or Sky Moore. I think Elijah Moore and Amon-Ra St. Brown should be picked ahead of the Darnell Moonies of the world. They just offer so much more upside. So I like that. I like those pick. Okay. I was sniped on, Russell Gage did not make his way back to me. I did select Tom Brady, but that was because, as I mentioned before, there was an ADP gap and value. I just couldn't pass it up. When you're double digits or almost double digits post ADP, and I know this is a large field, but like looking at some of the research that Hayden Winks has done, like I've been very keen to, if a player on BestBall Mania is lost or gained value, I suppose. I don't know how you want to talk about it. If a player's not being drafted until 10 spots after ADP, like the first question I have is there news that's something that I missed? Did they get injured? Or is there something else that's going on? And if none of those red flags in my quick research, pop up, then I'm selecting them, like, and allowing like later on in the draft to come to me. Like at this point in the 8th round, value, 10 spots of value, that's tremendous for Tom Brady. And I know I already had Patrick Mahomes, but that secured that I did not need to draft a third quarterback. In fact, there were a few teams who had to draft 3 quarterbacks. Balco drafted Aaron Rodgers and Matt Ryan and Jared Goff. Another team drafted Joe Burrow and Tua Tagovailoa and Ryan Tannehill. Yeah, another team drafted Dak Prescott, Kirk Cousins, and Mac Jones. I think a 3 quarterback build would be suboptimal for me, given the quarterbacks that I selected, Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes, who were on different bye weeks to begin with. So I'm not concerned about that. As I mentioned, a lot of these players now, I was just picking off value or players that I was very comfortable getting. David Njoku in the Superflex tournament that I was in, he was my 7th highest drafted tight end. And in the big board tournament, he was the number 1, the most drafted tight end for me. So to get him in the 14th round, yes, it was higher, but now we have a clearer picture. Back in January, February, March, and April, before the Austin Hooper cut, we didn't know that David Njoku was going to be stepping into this role and signed to this massive contract. He was franchise tagged, which was giving us a little bit of a hint and why he was on my radar, not just because of his athleticism and his efficiency metrics, but also because the Browns wanted him around and had a plan for him in their offense. And it's now become very clear what that role is. Probably the second pass catcher on this team. He'll be competing with David Bell for target share. Okay. Looking at any other egregious or notes, let's look at the last round just because usually some of the more interesting players pop up and I like to look at what other teams are rotating through their last round picks. So I saw a Cameron Brate. I think that's interesting. If I didn't have Njoku, if I waited for the likes of a Logan Thomas, I would have probably drafted a Cameron Brate. Or if I went with Gronk and Cameron Brate, that would have been an interesting spot if I wanted to stack. In fact, let's look at Rob Gronkowski. Where did he go off? Gronk went off at the end of the 10th round, the 10-12. So I would have had to select Christian Watson, who was already 9 spots after ADP, or Chris Olave, who was a dozen spots after ADP. That just fit my build better, and I lost out on Gronk. So, that's something that you can consider. Marcus Mariota is a last round consideration. I think that's the wrong thing to do. Like if you're banking on Marcus Mariota, your quarterback situation is probably not in a good spot. Like Russell Wilson is fine at the 8-5. Like I think that's a really good spot for Russell Wilson. And the issue is though it's not stacked with any significant piece. I'm looking at Denver. Maybe Albert Akugbanam is there. That's interesting to me. But you're depending upon Russ week in and week out, and uh, to have Daniel Jones there, you probably wanted to get a player like Davis Mills in the 19th round, or Carson Wentz in the 19th round, and not get Marcus Mariota, who may lose his job midseason. The Falcons may want to see what they have in Desmond Ridder midseason. And that's a legitimate narrative. And if Russ goes down, you're cooked. Whereas if Tom Brady goes down, I'm not cooked. Or if Patrick Mahomes goes down, I'm not cooked. If both of them go down, I don't have a bye week. Well, then that's a zero for that week in the quarterback spot. But injuries will happen. But I think that that was a false arbitrage there. Carson Wentz or Davis Mills should have been picked in the 19th round for this team to give better value. Looking at a few others, I'm out on Amari Rodgers at pick 213. Tyquan Thornton is a very interesting late stack with Mac Jones. And looking at any other New England pieces, no, there weren't any New England pieces. Not many Dallas pieces except for Dalton Schultz. I think Schultz is going to be the number 2 target in this Dallas team. So, and to get Jalen Tolbert later, that's nice. That's a nice little pickup. I like Darrell Henderson at the end of the 14th round as a running back insurance behind McCaffrey and Barkley and Chase Edmonds. I think that's a great spot for him. So I like Tyquan Thornton as a last round pick. I don't like Amari Rodgers. I don't like Terrace Marshall. Devin Duvernay, I don't think so. Calvin Austin, I think, as I talked about it before, Calvin Austin is the type of player you want to be targeting. That are going to have a good wide receiver matchup near the end of the playoff schedule. And all Calvin Austin needs to do is take one to the house because of his speed. Same argument could be made for Tyquan Thornton and Velus Jones. There's some Justin Fields, Byron Pringle, Velus Jones drafting happening here. And I'm here for it. Like late round, very late round. You've already got your Kyler Murray. You've got Marquez Valdes-Scantling, some spike weeks there. Drake London. I don't know exactly. I'm going to have to do some research on what rookies in the first half of the first round bring to your best ball teams over the last few years, but it's got to be pretty good. And then looking at Marvin Jones, Byron Pringle. I love Marvin Jones at the end of the 16th. And then now Pringle and Velus Jones to nicely, cheaply stack with Justin Fields. All right. Well, that will do it for today's podcast. Thanks to all of you for listening and tuning in. If you haven't subscribed to the Best Bell Fantasy Podcast, make sure you do wherever you listen to your podcasts. And make sure to check out the Best Bell YouTube channel, where I'll be drafting throughout the off season. Later this week, I'll be drafting on FFPC. And that'll be a live draft on Wednesday. On Thursday, I'm going to have guest David Gautieri come on. We're going to talk some best ball rankings. And on Friday, I'm going to have Sam Chowdhury of FTN come on, and we're going to talk about Week 17 matchups for your best ball teams, maybe which ones to target, which ones to fade, and who are some interesting players early round and late round that we should be looking at. All right. In the meantime, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at FFStalder. Make sure you give the likes and subscribes at the proper places. Thanks for listening. I appreciate it. In the meantime, good luck in the best ball.